Live? Are we live? We're live.
We should be live.
Awesome. Awesome. Let me see here. Let me see if I've got everything working. I can see comments. I don't see anybody yet. But if you're watching this, rock stars, and anybody else joining us from Ian's channels and audience, please drop a comment in and say hello and just let us know that you're here and that you're seeing us and hearing us and that our levels are great and all that kind of stuff. Ian, you can hear me okay? We're good to go?
I can hear you fine. I just checked. It's working on YouTube. Anybody watching on YouTube, there is a chat section to the right of the video. I have no idea where your right is. And in Facebook, if you leave a comment down below in the usual way, we will see it. I can see John saying howdy.
Yep.
Beetle Dave.
Yep. Ashwin. Welcome. AI Accident. Oh, yeah, I recognize you. He's making cool synth music in Sweden. Chad is awesome. And he was just here in Nashville for our VIP mixing mastering weekend. So that's awesome. Right. David, shout out to you and Richard. So welcome everybody. Awesome to have you here. Feel free to say where you're joining us from too, and just say hi to everybody in the comments. Chad, I don't even know what that means. Is that like a cheer? An M with a couple of slashes. Looks like victory pose. I love it. Shout out to Rob and Craig. So we'll jump in and kind of get rolling too, so that the replay of this doesn't have too much long-windedness at the start. But anyway, glad to have everybody here. Thank you so much for joining us. You all rock. I'm really excited to have Ian Shepherd joining us today from Production Advice UK and Mastering Media and host of The Mastering Show, one of the greatest podcasts you can listen to out there. Focusing on mastering and making great records and all the stuff we're going to get into today too. And also a longtime friend. Good to see you, dude.
You too. Good to be here.
I did hear a little bit of a pop. Hopefully that won't be a thing, but Rockstars, let us know if you got any audio challenges on your end or anything, or if we're hearing anything weird. Today we're going to jump in and talk about something that I'm really excited about. As I was getting ready for this, I realized that this is the beginning of Lij Shaw as a solo artist. This is the first time I've released a song with me singing, me as the artist. I've always been in bands before. I've got music that I've played on and produced and mixed and recorded all over Spotify. But this is the first time that it's me as an artist doing something. So I'm pretty excited about that. And the song, which you can see the link to right there, Rockstars, it's in the video, lidshaw.com/spring. And that is the song that we're going to talk about today. So I'll get into that in just a moment. I'll really kind of give a little bit of the backstory on it. But definitely please click on that and go listen to the song. You can either, you can do it now or you can do it later, or maybe we'll pause. We'll do a station pause or something like that so you can go check it out. But just also a reminder to, again, drop in your comments. Tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. And go ahead and hit the share button on this too, so that it kind of reaches more folks out there on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you're watching us and joining us. And Ian, why don't you jump in and share a couple of words and kind of let us know where you're joining us from. And you can say more about who you are and what the awesome stuff you're doing.
Okay, thank you. So I've been a mastering engineer for 25 years now. I'm based outside Cambridge in the UK. But I also, back in about 2008, I started a blog, a mastering blog. And kind of that's built up over the years. So I have the site Production Advice, where I post blog posts and YouTube videos. I mean, it's called Production Advice, but it's mostly about mastering. So with hindsight, I would rename that, but that's okay. Yeah. I also nowadays have the Mastering Show podcast, which thank you for mentioning. People get a great reaction to that. And I've been working on some plugins with meter plugs that actually we might, you don't need them to kind of take advantage of any of the stuff we're going to be showing you in this workshop, but I find them super useful myself, and lots of other people like them. So we could maybe talk a little bit about those.
Absolutely. I forgot to mention that just now, but I did mention it in the email that I sent out to everybody. So Rockstars, one of the things that's, that it's a specialty of Ian's is he is essentially, the authority in mastering for the appropriate loudness levels for streaming your music. And in fact, Ian is even founder of Dynamic Range Day. So there is a hashtag Dynamic Range Day. What's the date on that? That's coming up in, oh no, that already happened this spring, right? It's in the earlier spring, right?
Yeah, you around the end of March usually.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Is that in the vicinity of Record Store Day?
It is in the vicinity, although that's not intentional.
Yeah.
When I originally came up with the idea, I was chatting to a friend of mine, Dean Whitbread, and he suggested that it should be on the spring equinox, which
Nice.
in that first year it was, because he's very into the phases of the moon. And that's just seemed like, it was like, well, when shall I do it? And he said, how about the equinox? So we did that. So it's not exactly on, but that's kind of the closest thing. If anybody tracks that.
That's great. I love it. I love it. Well, dynamic range, it's all about like balance, right? So Rockstars, to continue on that thought, Ian has a plugin company called Meter Plugs, and they make a bunch of great tools which will help you arrive at those perfect target levels, whether you're mixing and or mastering. One of the first ones I remember discovering was Perception, which helps you get a better understanding of matching levels between having a bunch of plugins processing something and the original audio. So if you've ever experienced that thing where you do a bunch of stuff to something, you're mixing it, you think it sounds great, and then you get a chance to turn off all those plugins, and then you discover, oops, where I started sounded better than where I'm at now. Perception is a plugin that helps you find and figure that out, so you can hear the before and after on all your processing. And then I guess, Ian, that led to Dynameter, which is amazing. It takes me back to Yar's Revenge in the 1980s and my Atari 2600, but it's this whole cool plugin that you can put on your mix bus, and it helps you understand what your dynamic range levels are using really, really simple and cool color coding, so that you can basically just, try and make it look pretty and know that it'll sound pretty at the same time. And then that led you to other things like loudness penalty, which was a brilliant idea, which essentially addresses the idea that when you upload your music to streaming services, if you've mixed your music too loud, the streaming services are going to turn it way down, and it ends up having the opposite of effect of what you hoped for. Or maybe I should say it ends up at this essentially the same level. You just accidentally chopped off all your dynamics in your song, if that's a good way to think about it. So loudness penalty will let you, and maybe you could do a better job of explaining all this, but loudness penalty essentially is it's a free tool that you can use to upload your song and check it to see how your final master is going to play back on streaming. And then it's a plugin that you can purchase and you can install directly into your session so that you can check it in real time while you're mixing and mastering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, I'll just correct you on one thing there. It doesn't upload. All of the processing happens in the browser on your computer. So, because that's a concern that people have. So nothing gets uploaded. It's completely secure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it will tell you how much the music is going to be turned down, and then you can preview it. And actually, probably we'll get into that, because that's kind of I think it was you testing your master on loudness penalty, maybe, that got the conversation between us started about this song Spring. Do I remember that right?
Yep. And so and I don't even know if I said this clearly at Rockstars, but this live stream, we are going to take a look at my song that Ian mastered for me, which sounds amazing. And Ian's going to show us, going to give us a peek under the hood, right? And show us how you went about mastering that. And one of again, you just have too many specialties is why it's hard to do the introduction and get through it. But one of your specialties is teaching everybody how to master from home. You have the Home Mastering Masterclass, which is a deep, in-depth course that you can join. I think, is it still 8 weeks, the process? Yeah. Yep. So that is an 8-week deep dive, Rockstars, which will teach you the process for mastering your own music from your home studio, if you want to get into that. So we're going to get a chance to look at that. And maybe I'll do an introduction to the song really quickly, and then we can jump in and start talking about that if you want.
Yeah, for sure.
So the song is called Spring. Spring is an amazing thing. And it's a totally happy, fun, put a smile on your face tune that
Super
I
catchy.
wrote. Yeah, thank you. That I wrote and recorded years ago. around 2014, I think it was when I finally did it. And I used to, so I'm a single dad, and my daughter's now a teenager, driving her own car. She's probably sleeping in now. But but back then, when she was 7, she, we'd still be in the daily routine, getting ready for school the next day and everything. And at the end of the weekend on a Sunday night, it was like, that's like shower night or whatever, getting ready for school the next day. And so I got in the habit of going in while, she's singing in the shower, and I would just sit there with a guitar on the other side of the shower curtain, strumming guitar chords, happy dad, just trying to get my kid to sing and play music with me. And I just bang out a bunch of chords. And so I was sitting there, and then I'd take my iPhone and I put it in record so that whatever new idea was popping up, we could hear it. And I'd strum some chords. And at one point I was strumming these chords, and she started singing from the other side of the shower curtain, just singing, spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. And I heard that and I was like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. That's like a total hook chorus lyric. So then I had captured that. And then that week I sat down here in the studio, and I just kind of sat outside on a beautiful day, strumming out chords and coming up with the rest of the lyrics and stuff, and wrote the rest of this song. And so then fast forward, I decided I was going to go ahead and record it in the studio, recorded drums, bass, guitars, vocals. I think there's organ in there, yep, too, and some tambourine, although I can't remember if the tambourine made it onto the final cut. It may have decided to go with an earlier mix. But I also got my stepdaughter, Cara, to come in and sing some of the harmonies on it. And my daughter, Soraya, she was like, yeah, I don't want to sing on this. So she wasn't ready to sing on it, but she helped co-write it. So that's where this song came from. It was just a moment as a parent with my kid, singing about a beautiful day. She used to go out and just roam around the neighborhood playing with friends, and she'd be gone for hours and doing all kinds of fun stuff. And that inspired it. And so that's how we got to where we're at now. And then more recently, I decided it was finally time to, do an appropriate official release of the song. And so I realized that I had mixed it and mastered it myself, and I'd kind of done my best, but I didn't quite like the sound of my mastering. I thought it was a little too, I kind of was chasing the loudness thing too much. I did that classic move where I just tried to make it extremely aggressively loud, and it was good, but I knew it could be better, and it was missing things. Like, it didn't have the low end in it. You couldn't really hear the bass. It was kind of harsh, in the top end and stuff like that. And, you tell me what you thought of my original mastering, Ian, and you don't have to be nice to me. You can beat me up about it if you want, but you took it and then remastered it, and it sounds awesome now. Sounds awesome. It's really nice. The bass is full. Rockstars, if you're dropping in the comments here and you got a chance to hear it already, tell us what you think about the sound of it. If you think it sort of streams great off of Spotify, off the at the appropriate levels, and what you thought about the EQ and everything. But that kind of brings us to where we are now. And Ian, I thought it would be really fun if you wanted to show us, what'd you do? How'd you get it to sound so good?
Sure. Well, you'll be pleased to hear it was quite simple. And I really didn't think your original master sounded bad at all. I kind of agreed with I wanted to hear the bass more. I wanted it to be more open and spacious. I felt it was all a bit kind of claustrophobic and kind of dense. And and when I took a look at it, it was, as you say, you'd mastered it. Not insanely loud, but really loud, which doesn't leave you much room for those things to come through. So, and we were kind of having some backwards and forth, and you were kind of saying, oh, it's being turned down a loads. I can see that on the loudness penalty website. So we sort of threw some ideas around, and then in the end decided maybe it would be cool for me to just have a go at mastering it for you and see, so you could see what I would do with it. So why don't I go ahead and share it's really cool, by the way. I didn't realize that was how the song was written. I knew it was you and your daughters, but I hadn't realized that it was a kind of just a jam session in the shower. That's very, very cool. Anyway, let me just, there'll be a brief
I felt very lucky. When your kids are little, you can get them to do things like sing songs with you. When they get older, it gets a little challenging sometimes. They're doing their own thing.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes, so I'm going to go ahead and blow up my screen big so I can see everything too. Although I won't see the comments if I do that. Let me see how I'm going to do that.
Yeah. And I'll just check
cool.
that in
And Rockstars,
stream.
can you see it? You can see the screen share on your end?
Yeah, that's all
Hopefully
good.
you guys can all see that too. That looks cool.
Okay.
So right off the bat, what is the program that we're using for this? What's the app?
Okay, so I'm using Wavelab, which is by Steinberg, which is very much mastering focused, but you don't have to, especially not these days. I mean, like, I originally got it because it was cross-platform, because I was working in 2 locations and I wanted to be able to go from Mac to PC, which was a unique thing at that point. But it also had really good support for all of the things that you need to make CD masters. But obviously these days that's not nearly such of a big deal. So really anything that I'm doing here, I mean, if I just give you a quick tour of the interface for people who haven't seen it before. So this here, where you can see the waveforms, is what they call the montage. And I've got a few versions lined up there to compare, but obviously you can put multiple tracks and you can move them around, play with the gaps. You can add in the start and end IDs. You can tweak the crossfades, all that kind of stuff, which is one of the reasons it's so good for mastering. And then the other thing is that if you select an individual audio clip, and this is something that's coming into more and more DAWs now, but used to be quite unique, I can actually put effects directly onto the clip. So you can see there the plugins that I've used excuse me, for mastering this. Whereas if I choose that song, which is your original master, there's nothing on that because I'm just playing it back flat, for example. So that's where the processing is, if anybody's interested. And then over here in the master output section, I basically just have a bunch of meters. So I have, there's the loudness penalty app or plugin. There's a loudness meter made by Meter Plugs, which I will probably show you a bit later. There's my trusty VU meter here, which you can see, and hiding underneath that is Wavelab's loudness meter.
Is that the VUMPed meter?
That's the Klanghelm VUMPed, the best named plugin in the world ever. Yeah. And all still super affordable. And then I have Perception and Dynameter that you mentioned that maybe we can talk about a bit when we get going.
Yeah, and I like how you lay everything out very carefully as windows on the screen so you can see what you're doing while you're working.
I don't have a ton of space here, so I don't have the luxury of multiple monitors. I also want to keep the monitors out of the path of the monitor, the visual monitor out of the path of my speakers. So you can't see it, but the screen is actually angled back flat as well.
Okay, so it's down low and angled.
Yeah, exactly. And so, of course, today I have my AirPods in because I'm talking to you, so to stop spill. But normally I would be listening to the monitoring.
And very quickly, I thought I'd comment. When I've done some mastering, I've used, I used to use the Logic mastering app many years ago, which I don't know if that exists anymore.
Wave Editor, yeah.
Yeah, Wave Editor. And now Studio One is another one that I use, the project page. And not to compare things, but the process is similar. So what makes a mastering DAW unique is that each individual song, like you said, can have its own collection of plugins on it. And then you can have plugins on the output mix of all the songs if you wanted to. And then you can also have plugins, like you said, which are just for metering alone after all the processing is done. So sort of like different places you might want to be able to process things or not process things.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, people can hear the song for themselves using the link that's at the bottom of the screen. So I won't bother to play you a ton of it. I think perhaps the first thing I should do is just do you a kind of instant before and after of your mix versus the mastered version. And then I could step through the process that I used to kind of get from one place to the other. Because, you know, I listened to your master that you were asking questions about, and I was thinking, well, it sounds pretty good. But, and what I tend to do in that situation is I just went completely back to square one. You know, I just did my master the way that I would normally do it.
Yeah.
And then I brought your master back into the equation to compare and see whether I felt I was doing the right thing or whether I'd taken it too far or any of that kind of stuff. So probably the easiest, you can see, so this the highlighted clip here at the moment is the original mix prior to any mastering processing. And that mastering processing is up here. And so if I disable, in fact, I'm only using one plugin. It's I'll just quickly show you. It's a TC Electronic MD4 mastering processor, which is the plug-in version of something that I used to have in a hardware box for 10 or 15 years at the studio where I used to work. It's insane, right? That this box that cost literally hundreds of thousands of pounds, you can now buy the plug-in for $300.
Wow.
Anyway, here it is. And I'll kind of give you a tour of that in a minute. But basically, to remove the mastering process, I just bypass that. So if I do that, then you're just going to be hearing the original mix. And then I can enable it and you'll hear the change. So
let me see if I understand you. So the processing on the song itself is all contained within one sort of shell plugin? Or
yeah. Okay. So here's the plugin, right? And you can see over here, it's got tabs. So this is the input section. So it's got a gain where I've got 5 dBs of gain. It's got, that's most of it. You can trim the left and right channels. There's a few kind of things that have to do with the thresholds of the compression in other parts of the plugin. Then there's an EQ section, which looks pretty kind of familiar to,
look at that bass
everybody.
Boost. I love it.
Well, we'll get to that. Then there is a 5-band multiband compressor, but I'm actually only using 3 bands. Where do I show that 3 of them are off? I can't find that in the interface. Anyway, I like to use multiband in this because I'm listening to your master. I could hear that you wanted quite a glued, dense result, right?
Right.
So I wanted to achieve that with, I mean, it sounds a bit like a paradox, but with more space and with more kind of clarity and depth. Those were my goals.
Yeah.
And I could just tell from listening. One other thing about your mix and your master is it had quite a heavy snare, which I quite liked, but I felt actually was maybe a little bit too heavy for especially when you cranked it up.
Yeah. It was just for some context, I think I mixed that one originally when I had my console. I think I did go through the console with it. And I also did it before I knew a whole ton of mixing tricks. So I did a more recent one where I did a bunch of mixing tricks on it. And I ended up liking the original mix. There was something about just the simplicity of, the first time I did it that I preferred. And I think I liked the way the vocals, sat out and stuff like that. But that included a pretty loud snare drum.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was just, I knew that if I tried pushing that into a single band compressor, that was going to cause quite a lot of ducking, especially in the high frequencies in the vocals that I didn't want. And that's the advantage of multiband, is that you can compress, say, the mids, which is mainly what I'm doing, separately from the lows and the highs. And you can get my goal when I'm mastering is to be invisible, right? I don't want anybody to listen to it and go, wow, what an amazing sound Ian put on that. I just want them to go, hey, that's a fantastic song. I really love it. I appreciate all the work that you put into the mix. So I want to get out of the way, and multiband is a great way to do that. But because I'm only using 3 bands and they're pretty broad, it actually sounds quite similar to a single band, a traditional kind of bus compressor, glue compressor that people might use. But it doesn't have those problems with pumping and breathing that you can sometimes get. So, and you'll see how that works in a minute. And then the final section here is just the limiter. And so you can see I've got the threshold there. It's a True Peak limiter, which I have set to minus 0.8, not minus 0.1. Just, I don't know why. I was fiddling around with this. I moved from, I had been using FabFilter stuff for the longest time. And then this became available and I wanted to try it. And I just moved from one to the other. And these were the settings where I was getting closest to the sound of what I was doing with the FabFilter limiter, because I wanted to do clear comparisons when I was testing it.
No, I think I ended up getting a Waves True Peak limiter plugin that you had shown off once too, that gave me that ability to lower the ceiling and actually get that True Peak, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a huge tangent. I think maybe we should steer clear of that. But one thing I would say to people is you often hear people say, oh, I hate the sound of True Peak limiters. And in my opinion, that's because of the way they're testing them, right? So the way that I work, I mean, literally, if I just disable all these EQ bands, let's do what I said I was going to. So there you can see we've got flat EQ. And if I come in and disable the multiband as well, the only thing that's happening there is the limiter. But that goes in first. I don't ever want to hear, because one of the first things I'm going to do with any master, typically speaking, is bring the level up.
Yeah.
Because most people mix a bit quieter, and I'm not about super loudness, but I am about being in the sweet spot. And that usually means bringing stuff up. So if that happens, I don't want to hear any clipping. So for me, the limiter is always in the chain from the start. And if I hear something I don't like, I can tweak it or I can swap it out. But it's there from the beginning. So that means I never hate the sound of it because I make all of my decisions with the limiter in the chain, right? So whatever I'm doing includes the sound of that limiting and works with it. And I think what happens with people with True Peak is they have maybe they have a limiter that never used to be True Peak enabled, right? And then it's added as a feature. So they go in and they go, oh, well, I want that. And they enable it. And what happens is, because True Peaks will tell you when you might be unexpected peak levels that you wouldn't want, in order to get a True Peak limit, you have to actually apply a little bit more limiting than you would otherwise do. So they go from a non-True Peak limiter to hearing a True Peak limiter, and they immediately hear more limiting. So of course they don't like it because it'll pull the level back in little places. It might kind of dull the transients a little bit compared to what they were. And so all these people going, oh, I hate the sound of True Peak limiters. That's not a fair test. If they started with the True Peak limiter to begin with, and then just tried disabling it at the end, right? So they've been hearing it all along. They've made all of the decisions, and then they disabled it. I don't think they would hate the result nearly as much.
Yeah.
Because anyway.
Well, that's so cool. So takeaway for us, Rockstar, is to start with the True Peak limiter.
Yeah. When you're mastering, first thing, True Peak limiter, I would recommend -1 True Peak threshold, because the reason you want to avoid True Peaks above -1 is that if it gets streamed, if it gets encoded for Spotify or YouTube or wherever, or if it gets sample rate converted, or if it gets played back on a cheap or an affordable playback system, the peak levels can change, and you can get little overshoots, and those will then cause clipping at the end of the chain. So giving yourself a little bit of breathing space, in my opinion, is a sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
So then we go back, and if I just temporarily reduce this gain back down to, let's just type in 0 to, and then I play you a bit. Shining brightly in the sky. Hopefully you can hear that.
Yeah, let us know. I got my speakers down and my mic's still on, so let us know, Rockstars, if you're hearing it come back through microphones or if I should mute every time.
I didn't hear it here from your mic, and I think, but yeah, people listening should definitely tell us that. So that's the mix without any processing on it. And if we just look at the meters a little bit, I have a mastering level set up in my room that I've settled on over the years. So basically, as soon as I never change it. I have a dim level, but otherwise it's always the same. So as soon as I hear something, I know whether it's loud or quiet. But the other thing you can do is look at the meters. So if we just play a little bit of this, you can see the VUs are ticking around about -5 there.
Here's the critical question. What are the meters set at? So that's one of the things. Sometimes we get meters and then there's all these options and we're like, oh, where do we even put them? So
yeah, a good point. And actually, I don't know what StreamYard will do. If I do this, oh no, I can't zoom in.
I do know that Brian was saying that the text is pretty small on there, so we might want to just say it verbally out loud at the same time.
Yeah, I can't zoom in, but I have this. The VMT is, and most VU meters are probably calibrated at -18 out of the box, out of the virtual box.
As a VU meter, as an RMS setting, right?
It's similar to RMS. It's not exactly the same, but yeah, same kind of thing. VU meters came before RMS meters, and they kind of show RMS.
If we have a choice between peak or something else, we're not setting the VUMP as peak, right?
We don't really care about peak levels. Peak levels just tell you what the spikes in the waveform are doing, and we've got the limiter to deal with those.
Yeah.
So unless we push things way too hard, it's not going to be an issue. So yeah, out of the box, a VU meter like this up here will probably be calibrated to -18. For mastering, I changed that to -11. And then what I'm looking for when I'm mastering is to have these needles hovering around about 0. You'll see it when I'm playing the song, pushing up maybe +1, +2 for the loudest moments. And if I do that, and if I have the EQ balanced, basically I know I'm going to be in great shape. But if you don't have a VU meter, or you prefer to use an RMS meter, then -11 is a great RMS reference as well. And actually, if you've got a balanced EQ, then -11 LUFS is also kind of useful as a guideline. Quickly, we should say LUFS is loudness units full scale.
Yep.
It's the kind of the latest and greatest way of measuring loudness. Kind of first there was VU, then there was RMS, then there was LUFS. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And the confusing thing about it is there's 3 types. There's momentary, which is very fast response. There's short term, which is a slower, kind of more smoothed response. and there's integrated, which is a whole piece of audio. So basically,
whole
until you
song.
start and stop playing, usually a whole song or a whole episode of a podcast or whatever. I pay attention to the short term LUFS. In fact, if I call up the Lcast, my loudness meter here, you can see it's got a history of loudness in there.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see there's minus 11. It's pushing up to minus 10. If I just zoom in a bit so you can see this better, pushes up to kind of minus 10 at some of the loudest moments. And that's all I have. I mean, it does have a peak display here. So I've actually been into the settings and I've disabled the momentary loudness and the integrated loudness because I don't find them particularly useful for music. So that's another great tip. So all loudness meters will have the capability to measure all three, all LUFS meters. And my rule of thumb for this is loudest moments about minus 10 LUFS. Which is
good.
kind of +1 VU, right? Because the VU is set to minus 11, so minus 10 is one higher than that.
Okay, so and then what? And again, if we're looking at the VUMPT meter up there, generally, where do we want those needles to go? Right up to the 0?
I'll show you that, right?
Okay.
Because in my mastering process with this song, the first thing I did is playing it back. I'm thinking, okay, I want it to be louder, and I always adjust the level first because there's this thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve, the smile curve, the equal loudness curve, they call it. Basically, it says that as you increase the loudness, our ears perceive more bass and treble. The sound doesn't actually change, but we hear more of it. It's the reason that old amplifiers used to have a loudness button for listening when you turned it down quiet. And nobody knows quite why it is, but it's one of the reasons for the loudness war, because you can make your music sound better just by turning it up, doing nothing else, right? It's kind of free betterness, except when you go too far. So for me, there's no point if I make a bunch of EQ and compression settings with the music really quiet, and then I realize, it needs to be louder, and I turn it up. I'm then going to have to redo all of those settings because they're going to sound different to me just because I turned it up.
Yeah.
So stage 1, turn everything up. So let me show you that.
Birds were singing a song for me, and the blossoms in the cherry tree were blooming for the whole world to see. Because spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers.
So
Sounded
stage
better
1.
already.
Well, there you go. You see, that's 5 dBs of gain, right? And nothing else. One thing I did notice over here in the section of the plugin here, the limiter was pushing fairly hard, harder than I would like at that stage. And since I know that I'm going to want to use multiband compression, again, this is a way that I tend to work. I have everything working at once so that I can hear what things are doing in context. So the next thing that I would do is enable the multiband. So here's the same thing, but with multiband compression happening.
The sun was shining brightly in the sky. Well, the birds were singing
and if you look at the displays over here, it's pretty small in this plugin, but there's a low band, a mid band, and a high band where you can see the gain reduction kind of moving around there.
Yeah, it seemed like the
and
mid band was doing most of the work.
The mid band does most of the work. That means that there's room for the bass to punch through, and you don't get pumping and breathing in the high frequencies.
Yep.
As soon as I did that, as soon as the level is right, then I start hearing EQ stuff. And I think with this song, the first thing I did probably was bring in a little bit of high frequency EQ, just to open the sound out a bit. So I could show you how that works.
the sun was shining brightly in the sky. Well, the birds were singing a song
And if I bypass that, you can see it switching on and off there. So this is just switching the EQ in and out.
for me, and the blossoms in the cherry tree were blooming for the whole world to see. Because spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers.
So I don't know how well that comes across in the stream, but
Yeah,
that just
Rockstars, let us know again if the make sure the audio's not coming back through our vocal mics. I got my speakers down, so that hopefully that's not the case.
it's going to be a little bit swirly coming through the YouTube stream, but hopefully you can get the idea. That's a fairly subtle change. And pretty much as soon as I did that, then I felt like, I wanted a bit more weight from the kick drum, a little bit more thump, and I really wanted to hear the bass line. I wasn't for me, the bottom note of the bass line wasn't singing out as much as I would like it to. So that's when you commented on that big bass boost that I came in with.
Yeah.
So let's just play a little bit of that.
And the blossoms in the cherry tree were blooming for the whole world to see. Because spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours.
And I really like that.
That sounds
One thing
great.
to notice is, of course, that's happening prior to the multiband compression. So even though, what is that boost? That's 5 dB at 57 hertz, and it's fairly broad. So actually,
And that's a big boost. Let's qualify that. Typically in the mastering world, that might be considered a pretty bold move, right?
I'm a bold person.
you go.
It completely depends. It depends whether your pre and post compression
Yeah.
moves prior to because what I was going to say is the low end of the multiband is going to work against that. Actually, I haven't tried this, but let's just try an experiment. If I play it, watch the leftmost indicator on the multiband gain reduction here, and just see how it changes as I enable and disable that EQ boost.
Because spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours.
Yeah,
I
I
just
don't know whether
totally hear the bass guitar join the party right there.
I mean, it works musically, right? But one of the reasons it works is that what I noticed, I don't know whether you could see it on the screen because it's quite small, but without the EQ boost, that low band was maybe doing 2 or 3 dBs gain reduction every so often. When I enabled it, it pushed right down to 4 or 5 dBs of gain reduction at some points.
Yeah.
And that means not only are we lifting up that low end, but we're doing all that good stuff that compression does of evening things out, right?
Yeah.
Of just holding things in, sometimes letting the quieter stuff come through. You've got more consistency, more solidity. So you're able to have a big, if you tried that EQ boost without that multiband compressor in there or without some kind of compression, the chances are it would just balloon, it would get boomy and out of control and just kind of wild. So it's the two working in combination. I mean, you mentioned balance earlier on, right? For me, the mastering process is all about the balance and the kind of the push and pull of the different elements against each other. So I'll just play a little bit of that and kind of bypass that whole EQ change in and out. It's going to be a bit deceptive because I'm using mainly boosts. It will also seem a little bit louder, which of course gives me a bit of free sounding betterness. Sorry,
We're
you
getting
asked a
some
question.
good comments too. People are saying it sounds great. Alan, Beetle Dave, Brian, all jumping in saying it sounds great. So nice.
Cool, great. So I'll do a not loudness matched comparison with the EQ to start with, and then we'll get onto the loudness matched comparison in a minute. So here you go.
Spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours. So I jumped out of bed.
That was a great example there. It's when it drops down to that low note, do 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 doom 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 doom, that bit without the EQ.
And you don't come in for hours.
It's there, but when you bring the EQ in,
Come in for hours.
That's
for me,
awesome.
then it really speaks.
Yeah.
So from memory, I was pretty happy with that, and that's when I started comparing with the original master. And of course, I loudness matched it. Or in fact, you had already turned the master down, so I didn't have to do. I actually had to turn your master up. We'll come to that in a second. But then is when I noticed your big beefy snare, and although I felt it was a little bit over the top in the original mix, I liked it about your master, and I wanted to get a bit of that back in, and I was worried that the whole thing might sound a little bit scooped. So that's when I brought in the final EQ change that I had here. I don't think. Oh no, that one is due. I'll come to that in a second. So there's a bit of low mid boost down here. That's 1.5 dBs at 340 hertz with a nice broad, and I just kind of swept that around till it felt right, and that kind of supports the kind of the tone of the guitars, the low end of your voice, and just warms everything up nicely. So I'll quickly.
Spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours.
And it puts some nice thud back in on that
Yeah,
snare.
I totally hear that. And also just for transparency, I'm on my new speaker system here in the studio, the Carl Tatz Phantom Focus system. And one of the things that's wonderful about it is I can have my speakers down really low, and I absolutely 100% hear those changes now. at a nice quiet volume. So, rock stars, if you don't hear that yet, well, Brian mentioned being on some planar headphones, which is great. It's great when you can set up your monitors so that you really can hear these subtle details, because they do make an appearance. You just notice it sometimes when you're somewhere else and you finally get to hear it. But if you don't hear it on your own studio speakers, then it just means you got to keep setting them up.
Yeah, no, I agree. When you've got the studio monitoring nailed, all this stuff jumps out at you much more. You can hear it on other stuff, but you kind of have to search for it. Whereas when it's working right in the room, then that's when it kind of leaps out at you.
Do you find that listening at a low level makes it a little easier for you to hear those changes?
Yeah, I said I only have one mastering level, and I literally have a mark on the amp so that I don't ever change it. But I also have the dim button on my monitor controller set up with a 12 dB pad. So when I hit dim, the level drops, and I flick constantly between those. And what I tend to do is I'll start full level, bring the level up, get the EQ right, and then dim it and make sure, because one of the funny things is that when you dim it, then you might also start hearing some of that pumping and compression, overcooking of the sound that you didn't otherwise have.
Yeah, Andy jumped in and said he agrees compression is easier to hear when the volume's turned down.
Yeah, right. And the other thing, EQ, it needs to be loud because it wants to be in the level where your ear has got the flattest response. So what you don't want to do is dim it and then start re-EQing it, unless
because you'll do that smiley face thing.
Exactly. But I'll dim it and I'll listen. I'll go, oh, maybe is that, and then I'll bring it back up and kind of confirm what I'm hearing and make the decision at full level. But what I do is, not so much with a single song, but if I'm doing an album or a group of songs, I skip between them with the dim button in, and that's a great way to kind of second guess if the relative loudness between the songs, that the big song sounds right compared to the quiet song, but the quiet song is still audible at low level as well as at high level, and the EQ as well. If everything works at both of those levels, then you know that you're onto a winner.
Sweet,
I would say.
And we got some questions coming in, but we can save them. We'll try and do a Q&A at the end, so we can keep showing off.
I'll quickly toggle this. You can see there, what have I got? That is minus
like
half a
bringing
dB.
The highs back down.
Yeah, a shelf, minus a half a dB at 7.8. So it's just taking down that really super fizzy stuff up at kind of 16K. I have no idea whether this will be audible on a stream, but I'll play it for you just in case.
Because spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours.
It's a little tougher to hear that one. That's pretty subtle, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think from memory, I thought the cymbals were sounding a little bit tizzy,
They probably were.
Just a little bit hype. Well, but remember, I've got a boost in there, right? That EQ there that's coloured in blue, and I can't select that one. No, there. That's 0.8 dB at 8 kilohertz, right? So, but free tip for everybody, this is something I do a lot. I will quite often go in with a shelf going one way and then a parametric going the other way. So like a classic would be, I need more low end overall. So I'll use a low shelf to lift out that low end. But then once you've brought all of the low end up, suddenly there's a lumpy bit in the bass guitar that sticks out. So you go in with a parametric just to even that response out. And this is kind of the opposite, where I've dipped everything down and then thought, in fact, probably what happened, I might even have only put that blue boost in there to work against the pink cut. So I'll take everything super high up and then I'll just shape that contour to get the best possible result. So quick A/B of all of the EQ before and after, which is deceptive because everything is boosting. I'm not one of those only ever cut people. It's like, if I want more, I boost. If I hear too much, I cut. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But boosting EQ does tend to make things sound a bit louder. So you're hearing even more benefit from this EQ than there really is.
Spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours. So I jumped out of bed with nothing to lose. I'm shaking off.
So that's all good. This is the point in the process where I'm thinking, okay, I'm happy with that, but now I need to check it against the original mix again to make sure that I haven't gone too far or done something inappropriate, right? The problem with that, which we touched on earlier, is if I just bypass this entire plugin, let me try it.
Surprise, the sun was shining brightly in the sky.
It's also quieter.
There's also a 5 dB drop in level, right? Because of that gain that I added in the first stage. I could do that gain as a separate process, which would help. But this is where I want to do a loudness matched comparison. And back in the day, I would have had the source on one fader on the desk. I'd have had the master on another fader. So I'd have pulled the master fader back so that I could toggle between them. I'd literally use
between two things.
And there are dedicated mastering controllers that allow you to do that. In this case, I'm going to use my perception plugin that you mentioned, which is over here. So, I mean, basically, there's one instance of it up here at the beginning of the plugin chain, which, okay, I need to disable. Is that going to work?
Hey, while you're doing that, I'm going to make a comment. Rockstars, if you're watching this on replay, I encourage you to listen for these changes where you can see Ian turning things on and off, but then pause, rewind, close your eyes and listen one more time, and make sure you're hearing it. Because, visual indicators, as Ian has taught me in the past, will completely fool you into thinking you hear things when you might not. So it's good to double check your ability to hear things without seeing anything at all.
Yeah, that's a great hint. So the way that perception, we've renamed it Perception AB to make it clearer what it does. The way that it works, there's one instance at the beginning of the processing chain here prior to, you can see there's a stereo enhancer there, but it's bypassed. I never used that. So perception is there. Then we have all of this processing that I've just been talking you through. And then there's another instance of it over here on the master output bus. And I have the window permanently open here. So it listens to the loudness before and after and measures them. And then when I hit match level, it matches them. Yeah. And then I can flick between them with no change in loudness, and that's the key.
Yeah, I want to clarify that again. So Rockstars, the reason why there's a plugin way over here and a plugin way over there is because, like a console, you've got to peel off the original signal and send it on a bus to get to the speakers, so it skips all the processing. So that this clever plugin does all that so that you can hear with all the processing, but you can also hear it as if you never went through the console and the plugins and the gear and all that stuff.
Yep, exactly. And you can
Is
see
that fair to say?
Yep, absolutely. It also compensates for any latency. I mean, in this case, the TC plugin only has 16 milliseconds, but that's being compensated for. So if I play this,
But to my surprise, the sun was shining brightly in the sky. Well, the birds were singing a song for me, and the blossoms in the cherry tree were blooming for the whole world to see.
you can hear when I've got the blue pre button highlighted here, you're hearing everything before the mastering process, but loudness matched.
Yeah,
so that's the
like
source.
that's like the Mo worse button.
Well, it's like the this is what you used to have button.
Yeah, it's like, hey, who just put my mix through a crappy speaker? And then I'm like, oh, that was the original mix that I sent you.
Well, I think the cool thing is, I don't know about you guys, but to me, that post version, that mastered version, still sounds way better, even though we don't have that big difference in loudness, right?
Yeah, no,
and that's
absolutely.
what I'm using.
I hear it 100%.
Yeah, this is what I'm checking, is to make sure that I'm not fooling myself, that the changes I made are genuine improvements, not just changes in loudness.
So I'm gonna once again, just for the rock stars who are like still wrapping their brain around this, what we've done is we've taken the original mix and then Ian's mastered version of the mix and make sure that they're matched levels so that when he flips back and forth in that Perception AB plugin, you're not hearing any change in level, so you don't get any kind of cheating as to something sounds better because it's louder. And so you really truly hear, you know, what the difference in sound is if you were just listening to it in your car later or wherever, you know. It's the real world experience. So let us know, Rockstars, if you're hearing that difference too. Dropping comments about, you know, what you hear and the difference between the original mix and the master. Ian, go.
Absolutely, completely agree. The only thing I was going to say is you don't need perception to do this. You can match loudness by ear. I mean, that's a skill that mastering engineers learn over a career. You get better and better as time goes on. But these days, you could use a loudness meter. You know, for example, I could just play this section here one of the nice things about Wavelab's loudness meter, which you can see here, is that it resets every time you hit play. So if I just play a short section.
Birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day.
The integrated loudness, the overall loudness of that little bit that I played there, is minus 9.7 LUFS. And you remember I said at the beginning that my kind of ballpark was loudest sections of the song at minus 10. So I'm 0.3 of a dB over, but I'm going to let myself get away with that.
Yeah, but that's also the chorus. That's the big chorus right there.
Exactly. That's the biggest moment. So if you were doing this yourself and you didn't have perception, you want to try this yourself, you take your mastered version and you want to measure that same moment in the original mix. And it'll probably, I mean, what did we add? We added 5 or 6 dBs. So your original mix was probably down at minus 15 at that point, right? So what you want to do there is turn down the mastered version after all that mastering processing by 5, 6 dBs, whatever it is. And then you can do that same fair comparison yourself. And you could just solo between streams. In fact, I'm going to show you that in a second because that's how I'm going to compare with your original master, Lidge. But the last thing I want to tell you, if you've got eagle eyes, you will have noticed there's a tiny little bit of automation going on in this
totally
song.
Picked up on that.
Like if I select these two here now, I don't know what values those are. Let's see if it'll tell me. So that's 0 dB and that is plus 1 dB. So what's happening is I'm pushing the loudness or the level of the mix into the compression, into all the mastering processing, just 1 dB more for the chorus, just to help it lift out.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that away. So I'll just turn this down. I'll play it.
By the
through
way, I
without-
just want to say I love the fact that you did that.
Cool. That's good.
I've always wondered if mastering would get granular like that in the same way that I would if I was editing and mixing in the studio. I mean, when we're making music, we're not afraid to get granular with it if we want to. And I wasn't sure if that was really part of the mastering process. So it's very cool to see that you're willing to go wherever it needs to go, you know?
Yeah, it's part of my mastering process. There are mastering engineers who would never do that. And there, you know, I mean, if you take it at another stage, there are some people who like to work with stems where they're actually balancing elements of the mix against each other, which is kind of blurring the boundaries. But yeah, for me, and I would say that that's not necessarily to say that it wasn't right in your original mix, right? Because we're listening to the mastered version that's pushing into that compression and limiting. So the question is, how does it come out? And does it still work musically at the end of the process?
Yeah.
And for me, I just want a little bit more kick in the chorus. And the nice thing about this version is not as loud as your original master was originally. So we've got the room to do that, right? This is one of the benefits of kind of saying, okay, I know that on YouTube, Tidal, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon, everywhere, it's going to be normalized. Anything that's much louder than my music is going to get turned down. So I don't have to worry about making it super loud. I can master it at what I think is the best level for the song, and I can take advantage of the benefit of these dynamics. So let's see if you can hear this on the stream. I'll play it through into the chorus without that level lift, and then I'll put it back, and you guys can see whether you can hear it. I'd love to know in the comments whether people can hear it. So here's without, with a flat level going through, which is going to end up with more compression in the chorus.
Let this sunshine come on down. Everything is beautiful and free. Well, spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours.
And that works because the performance steps up, you know, the arrangement steps up. You can hear that that's meant to be louder, but here's what I ended up with.
I never look around, gonna let this sunshine come on down. Everything is beautiful and free. Well, spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours.
So,
Just
I want to make a comment. So Beetle Dave was jumping in and asking if, lifting at 1 dB, if it just gets canceled out by the limiter. But I can see in the VU meters there that you actually do get the lift. It's like the VU RMS or whatever we want to call it. LUFS lift happens a little bit, even if the peaks are still getting managed later on.
This is a key thing. Peaks don't really tell us anything about loudness. I mean, they do. If you have a file that's peaking at -4, and then you turn the same file up by 2 dBs, it's going to peak at -2, right? So in that sense, but if you have a song that's already peaking at 0 going into a limiter, and you push it up by another 2 dBs into that limiter, it's still going to peak at 0 because that's what the limiter is doing, or -1, or wherever you have it set. But the loudness still came up underneath it.
Yeah.
And that, to be honest, that's the problem with extreme loudness, is that, like, if you're way down here, I don't know if you can see my hands on the stream, but if you're way down here and this is the top, this is the peak level, and something else is up here, then you're going to suffer in comparison to that, because just like we were saying, quieter stuff doesn't necessarily sound as good.
Right.
If you bring the song up to that same level, similar level, which is what I've done, that's beneficial. And actually a lot of the processing that you use is also benefit. You know, it's the process of making it loud also has some advantages, like the multi-band compression, pulling everything together, gluing it, just taming that snare a little bit, all of those kind of things. But if you then start pushing it further, which can be tempting, maybe you'll get away with that for a little bit. But the closer your loudness gets to that peak level, the less room the music has to breathe, the less room it has to move. And you very quickly run out of advantages and start getting disadvantages, like it starts to sound flat and lifeless and crushed and maybe even distorted, which maybe is a perfect... I'm not saying that your master sounded any of those things, but by comparison, if we just, instead of now flicking between the before and after mastered version of this song, I'll go back to Lidge's original master. Now, this actually started out quieter than my master because you had turned it down.
Yeah.
Right.
I tried it. What I did is I took my original master and then I used loudness penalty to see how much it was penalized. And then I adjusted the level of it just to see what would happen. I thought, I'm like, you know, I'm not afraid to try stuff. So in that case, I was like, the quickest thing to see if it could work is to just simply turn the level of my master down and see what it does.
Right.
You know, without, but not turning it down into, I couldn't, just for clarity, Rockstars, I didn't have access to my mastering session anymore. So I just had to take what I had, and that was what I had, and experiment with it. And we jumped through a lot of hoops actually, because I had to recreate edits from the original mix and all kinds of stuff.
Yep. I caused Lidge a real headache by requesting a less heavily compressed and limited version of the mix to work from to do my new master. And I mean, you can just see looking at the waveforms. I mean, I'll tell you, spoilers, they are matched loudness, but you can see how much difference there is in between the in fact, actually that's slightly deceptive, because look, that's scaled slightly differently. I don't want to fool anybody, so let's just, but even so, you can see how much
maybe
spikier
point
the mix
at it so people know what we're looking at. So the gray one on top is my master, which looks bricked out.
That's Lidge's original master. This is the mix, right? My master is also going to have lost some peak information, because you're seeing that waveform is pre all the processing. So it's a bit of an exaggerated comparison. But what I'll do is I'll just flick the
middle track. When you're pointing out what you worked from, we're looking at the middle track there.
Yeah, ignore this. This down the bottom is, well, I could tell you about that. We could talk about that maybe if we have time. What I have soloed here at the moment that's lit up, that is the new master, or the new mix going through the mastering processing. Yeah. And then I'm going to use the reference track in Wavelab here to flick.
And that's what I sent you.
Yep.
That was my master.
The top one, which is Lidge's master. So I'll just do that a few times and you can see what you think.
Well, the birds were singing a song for me, and the blossoms in the cherry tree were blooming for the whole world to see. Because spring is an amazing thing, with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day, and you don't come in for hours. So I jumped out of bed with nothing to lose. I'm shaking off these winter blues, feeling like the world is evergreen.
Mine feels like it's shoved into a closet all of a sudden.
Right. And that's what I was hearing, you know, when you first asked me about it. I was just thinking, yeah, it just needs more room to expand and breathe, and, you know, so that we can get that depth in the bass, so that we can get that openness in the highs. And the whole process kind of contributes to that. Now, let me just check. Your master is peaking at... Oh, it doesn't go through the...
Hey, I'm going to talk about something real quick too while you're doing that. This is sort of real world experience comment, because a lot of this discussion.
Sorry, I'll finish.
It's all right. A lot of this discussion is about this idea of getting it right for streaming, but I just want to remind us that a lot of our real world experience when we're creating the music is we're not hearing it through that streaming platform until it's released. We're hearing it playing off a Dropbox file. We're hearing it playing off a Box file. Maybe we've uploaded it to Samply and we're listening to it there, and we are hearing absolute loudness, not adjusted loudness. And so we do experience that thing where, like, when something's really loud, it does play back really loud. And my master had that quality where it was just like, it was just hurting my ears in the car a little bit, when I'd listen. So I know that, I think that's up for debate whether that's relevant, because ultimately it's going to go to streaming where the world's going to hear it. But it is good to remember that a lot of our creative experience is one where we're hearing things loud, we're hearing things soft while we're working on it,
I think it's absolutely relevant. And I think it's a really good point, because, the streaming normalization is not doing anything to the sound, right? It's just evening out the loudness, because people complain if there are sudden changes and they don't like being suddenly blasted by loud music or having to crank up the volume because something's got super quiet. So it's just a volume change. So what's happening is it's just revealing what was there in the sound all along. And I completely agree with you, even though if you actually did a kind of an A/B comparison with these, like if you had these on CD and you put my master in the car and then your master in the car, first thing you do was adjust the volume control so that my master is loud enough and that your master is not too loud, right? So we're doing our own kind of normalizing just by ear. But I completely believe that what you can hear when you do this comparison, because it's very revealing, you loudness match them and you flick A/B between them like that. I think subconsciously we pick up on that stuff anyway. That's what happens to me listening to a lot of the super compressed, it's funny actually, as part of my setup this morning, we decided not to stream anything from Spotify because of copyright things on this stream, but I was comparing the master on Spotify with other stuff, just to make sure that what I was saying actually was true. I was like, well, maybe it doesn't sound as loud. It absolutely does. In fact, I was comparing it to Imagine Dragons. If anybody wants to, that's an extremely loud master, and your song sounds just as loud as them with the default settings of Spotify. But then I got distracted and I was doing something else, and Spotify was just playing in the background, and I suddenly went, oh, that sounds good. What's that? And I looked back across, and I had Dynameter on the output, just because I was looking at stuff, and realised that this was a master from 1998, I think, and was actually pretty dynamic by modern standards. So it was the dynamic thing that stood out, that caught my ear, that went, hey, I sound really good when you listen in this way. And that's why I go on about this stuff all the time, because I think it's genuinely, it's like a secret weapon. If you understand this stuff, you can take advantage of it and make your music sound better than other stuff that's out there. I think a good reminder too is when we are listening to stuff,
we hear differences in the moment between one song and another thing, but once we're actually in a song, we're in the world of that song, and we'll just adjust the volume, and it's like, we just want that to sound as good as it's going to sound while we're listening to it. And at that point, it kind of doesn't matter whether it's louder or quieter than anything else, as long as it sounds great coming out of the speakers.
That's the goal. One last thing I want to show
Ryan was asking a question too, saying, did I hear that correctly? Is there a way to preview masters on Spotify? Maybe that was something that I said. No, I wasn't saying that, but did I miss something that you said about that?
No, what I was saying was, because your song is, I mastered this a few weeks ago, right? And you've uploaded it to Spotify. So I was just listening to it on Spotify.
Right.
I mean, you can do it kind of quietly you could have an extra account, Brian, I think, and upload it that way. But the easiest way to hear this kind of stuff is to use the Loudness Penalty website, which we could maybe show people in a minute, because it doesn't preview the codecs, but it previews the loudness. In fact, let me show it to you.
And then also we're an hour in, so if we want, you let us know when you want to start pivoting over to Q&A, because we got at least a few questions we can scroll.
I was just going to say, I'll show you one other thing in Wavelab, then I'll show you Loudness Penalty, then we'll do Q&A.
Great.
I wanted to show you how these songs look in Dynameter, just because it's another way of. So I'll start off by playing my master, and if you want, Dynameter's up here in the top right hand corner. So if you just look at the display.
Song for me in the
And now I'm going to switch to your master, Lidge.
So Rox,
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say we're looking at the top right of the screen where the color bar is coming up and down. Yeah, he's grabbing it right now.
So now here's the same section, but from Lidge's master.
Well, the birds were singing a song for me, and the blossoms in the cherry tree were blooming for the whole world to see. Because spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't come in for hours.
So the bottom half of this is my master, and the top half is Lidge's master. And the interesting thing is you notice, so the width of it shows you how squashed or unsquashed the sound is, how close that loudness is to the peak level. So mine started down here with a fair amount of space, and then when it got to the chorus, it was pushing into the orange and occasionally the red, because that's the loudest moment of the song. Then I rewound and played Lidge's master from about halfway up here, and even the verse was already as squashed as the chorus section of mine. And when we got to the chorus of Lidge's master, you can see it's pushing down into the kind of brown coloration here. And from there on, it gets even narrower and narrower and down to kind of grey and all the rest of it. Yeah. That's the idea of Dynameter. You can just see at a glance. You're working away and you glance up at it, you go, oh, I'm pushing into the red. Am I happy with that? Or I haven't been anywhere near the red for ages. Maybe I should consider pushing it a little bit harder. Yeah. And again, it shows you the same stuff, but those guidelines of -10 with Dynameter here, if you're kind of kissing the red, which gives you a reading of 8 up here in the loudest sections, then you're in good shape. Which can be a nice kind of visual representation.
Let me qualify that. So Rockstars, again, both of those masters, listen to Ian's version of it and then listening to my version of it, they both are playing back at the same loudness for us as we listen to them. So one is not louder than the other. They're both equally loud. However, Dynameter gives you that like look through a magnifying glass at what's going on inside the track, and it demonstrates that Ian's has more dynamic range going on within the master. So even though they both sound equally loud to us, Ian's actually has the peaks are reaching out. There's information that's speaking more in there, like snare hits and transients and stuff that basically lets our ear enjoy the song better. I guess that's one way to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. And then very quickly before we get to the Q&A, just to Brian's question about previewing this stuff, here's the Loudness Penalty website, loudnesspenalty.com. It's free. If all you have to do, so my master, which folder am I in? Okay, so your original master here, Lidge, Spring Edit, lower level master from something edit, which is one of those classic, highly informative file names. So that's being measured in the browser. It's not being uploaded.
Yeah, just information's. It's just going to use the internet to give us levels or something like that, right? Or maybe not even.
It actually doesn't. It's all in the browser, so it just downloads from the internet. When you access the site, it's sitting there, and the JavaScript in there, or actually I don't know what it's coded in. Anyway, here are the results, and we can see that because you had adjusted the loudness of your master, right?
Yeah,
it was about right in terms of the distribution loudness of these platforms. On YouTube, on Spotify, on Tidal, it was only going to be turned down by 0.5 dB, which is fine. Right. And on Apple Music, it's going to be turned down a bit more because they have a lower distribution loudness level.
Because Apple schmapple.
Because Apple schmapple. And we can now preview that result with a loudness adjustment.
That's
the other thing I can do is in the other tab.
We should point something out too. If you go back to that tab. So Rockstar, see the arrow at the top there? When you're previewing, if you move that arrow to a different one, Spotify, Tidal, or Apple, your preview will change too. So you're hearing what it sounds like on each of those. So the Apple one, the preview would actually play back 2 dB quieter, I think, right?
Exactly. But it would only be a gain change. I should just say this is not previewing the codecs that these platforms use. It's just the loudness. Yeah. And I've moved that across to 1:25 so we can compare the chorus. So I've got another tab here, and I'm just going to open up. I need to find the mastered version. And we'll drop that in.
Glad it's you doing the looking on your computer, not me trying to find stuff.
I had done a little bit of prep in advance.
That's good thinking.
Also, my file structure is always the same for every job I do, because that's the way
Frosty
most
jumped
heads
in,
work.
or Frosty, excuse me. Frosty jumped in and said that he loves using this plugin. He's using it all the time.
Cool. That's great to hear. So now my master is being turned down by 3.5 dB on each platform,
Fascinating.
which you might think is a bad thing. But if I play you the chorus, this is my master.
Spring is an amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you don't.
You guys can hear that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. And then here is your master Lidge, reduced in level by 0.5 dB.
Amazing thing with the birds and the bees and the flowers. You go outside and you play all day and you
I'll go back.
come in for hours.
It sounds to me like the sound just opened up with your master, just like clarity just opened up.
Yeah, and that was my goal, right? That's what I was hoping to do. More depth, more space, more life, more spring in its step.
There you go.
But that's even though my master has been turned down by 3.5 dB. Now, the last thing I did when I was in Wavelab, before we came across to this, was just to check the peak levels of your master. And from memory, that's doing something different now, but I've written down minus 2.48. So if we had put your original master, and I've turned your master up here because you turned it down by 3.2 dB, so that's 5.7 dB. So if we put your original master, original, before you'd adjusted the level into loudness penalty, we would have seen that your master was being turned down by 5.7 dB,
Yeah.
right? Which is the numbers that you were seeing that drew you into this whole kind of process that we're talking about. But I think the reason I'm showing you this, and the important thing, is that it's not really about the numbers. It's all about the preview, right? Doesn't matter what you're comparing. You can bring in your favorite reference track. It could be Imagine Dragons. It could be Taylor Swift. It could be whatever. Put it in, look at the numbers. Oh, the numbers are interesting, but then listen. And the key thing is that this site will show you how they're going to play back on those platforms in terms of the loudness. And then you can choose the one that sounds the best, because that's ultimately. So from what you're saying, in this case, you would choose my master.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I definitely would. Already
So
have.
that's good. Excellent.
Yeah,
Yes,
so that's
exactly.
great. So if I hear you correctly, you would encourage us to try multiple versions of something we're working on, and load them up in some browser tabs like this, and then flip between them to see which one we, disregarding even the dB results yet. Just listen with our ear now that they're matched in level and decide which one we like the sound of best, because that's what it's going to ultimately sound like on streaming.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing I would add to that is that for me, so this song is mastered as loud as I think the song can handle, right? That's always my...
Yeah.
So that guideline of the minus 2, I find that translates really well to a really wide range of genres. In some of them, where there's more variety, that means the overall values will come out lower, but it works really well. So what that means is, I think if you see more than a -4 on loudness penalty with your master, that's when I would start asking questions.
Yeah.
I kind of think, is that definitely, and maybe, okay, well, let me try easing it back a bit. How does it sound if I now compare a version that's a couple of dBs less loud with the original loud version, and when I preview them in loudness penalty, which one do I prefer? And sometimes you'll hear no difference. Sometimes, you might prefer the louder version, depending on what the material is and depending on what you're going for. But it's a really important comparison to make, because I did some calculations, I found some facts and figures. I think between 80 and 90% of what we hear online is being normalized. And the reason for that is that YouTube has 2 billion users annually listening to music, right? Not 2 billion users listening to videos, 2 billion users who use the YouTube video platform to listen to music. Whereas the music streaming services have somewhere between 500 million to maybe 1 billion. So worst case, 60% of what you hear online is being listened to on YouTube, and everything there is normalized all the time. You can't turn it off. You can't change the settings. It's just what it is. And then when you add in the fact that Apple, Spotify, Tidal, all the rest of them by default have loudness normalization enabled, right? it's a super important way to listen to the music to understand how things are going to
So when you
sound.
say normalized, you mean loudness normalization, not old school normalization.
Correct. Nothing to
Okay.
do with peak. They're using loudness normalization just in the way that I'm showing you here, right? I mean, your song, both of our original files were peaking at 0, but yours was being turned down by 5.7 dBs. Mine was only being turned down by 3.5. It's to do with the
That's
loudness, not to
awesome.
do with the peaks.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for diving so deep into it and really showing us, because it's very cool to see you demo it. Because I think sometimes, we might even understand how something like loudness penalty works, but the the care with which you set that up to show us one versus the other inspires me to want to show you guys this mug really quickly. There's what it feels like to put your music out there, and there's my kid jumping off a diving board. So that's how it felt to master my own music, and now I feel like I'm in good hands, and we got a great version up there. Let's jump up to some of the questions. If you want to take a few Q&A here, see if I can scroll back and find them. I'm not sure if I don't think we have a question feature, although you might be able to highlight some stuff if you wanted. I'm going to go back. Here's the first one I noticed. This comes in from Richard, who said, did Ian put the compressor on before the EQ, even though the EQ is before the comp?
Yes, I did. I don't always. Obviously, if you're putting your own plugins in the chain, you can choose what the order should be. I like to have compression after the EQ because to me, remember my goal in mastering is to be invisible. And to me, the best way to achieve that is to have a balanced EQ going into the compressor. Just to think of a simple example, if you've got like an EDM track with a pounding kick drum, and you push that into a single band compressor, you're going to get pumping and breathing in response to that kick drum.
Yeah.
If that kick drum is too heavy, then you'll get more pumping and breathing. If you try and EQ that out afterwards, you can reduce the heaviness of the bass so that it sounds balanced, but the pumping and the breathing is still there because that happened reacting to the original. Whereas if you go back before the compressor and even the EQ out there, I'm not saying match it, but just get it so that it sounds musically balanced, then you'll get less pumping and compression from the compression stage. And obviously, when you're mixing and producing, all bets are off. You might want that heavily compressed sound. In fact, it's, sidechain bass and all the rest of it is a big part of EDM. But for me in mastering, it's like I want to respect what the artist did and preserve that. So I want to get out of the way. So yeah, I always
No, I think it's
prefer
great.
to do
And
the
I
EQ
think
first.
that's always one of those questions you come up with early on is like, do you want EQ before or after compression? And I think the answer is both. It depends. They do different things.
You can achieve different things. I mean, a nice thing to do is add a little bit of high frequency after the compression just to bring in a little bit of air without causing anything to kind of stick out of the mix nicely, for example. But the processing comes prior, but I enabled the compression first because I wanted to apply those EQ changes with the compression in place, right?
There you go.
If I had not had that compressor enabled and I'd gone in to try and boost that bass, I might have decided, well, this is never going to work because suddenly it would all sound too lumpy and thumpy and boomy. But knowing that I was going to use some gentle compression, I put that in so that I was hearing it with the compression and then make the EQ moves with the compression.
Yep.
So that I'm hearing them in context and I choose those EQ settings knowing how they're going to sound with that final compression.
Yeah.
That to me is the fastest and most efficient way to work.
I'll use the guitar analogy again for guitar players. You're going to want to plug your guitar into the amp and hear the sound of the amp before you decide how you want to play the notes on the guitar, because that's what it's going to sound like, and that's the same thing. All right, so we got
analogy.
some more comments. And then I think I mentioned this before, but Andy had commented earlier saying compression is easier to hear from when the levels are turned down. I like that. It's just a reminder, rock stars, to really have those. Well, I'll circle back and say Ian pointed out to us that he's got one listening level and then a 12 dB lower listening level for mastering. I guess in mixing, maybe we have a little bit more. We probably arrive at something similar as far as what kind of levels we want to work at. But also, it's good to be checking things at all kinds of levels when you're ready to, because you will hear things at quiet levels that you won't hear loud, and you'll hear things at loud levels that you won't hear quiet. All right, so here, and then Jack Shot Records. Jack said, I'm listening to the worst earbuds on the planet. He didn't use the word worst. He used a different one. But all the moves are still translating really well. So that's awesome to hear that all that mastering stuff you were showing us is translating right on earbuds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me see.
I saw
here.
one here. I saw a comment from AI Accident saying that change equals change. And then I'm not 100% convinced, but I'll keep that statement with me. And I think what he's saying is he's not convinced about the whole loudness difference thing that I'm talking about. Change equals change, but how we perceive that change depends on how we listen to it. So if I put in a low cut at 70 hertz, I have removed the vast majority of the bass below 70 hertz. But if I listen to that on a phone speaker or on a pair of NS10s, I might not perceive that change, right? And a change in loudness is the same as a change in the frequency response of the monitoring or anything else. It changes our perception. So the whole idea of loudness matching is to enable you to hear the change accurately, right? What I'm saying is if there's a loudness difference as well, you get fooled about the way that change actually sounds. And I mean, you can, don't take my word for it. Go away and try this stuff. What I would say is I've done demos so I've been in a lecture theatre and I'll play people. I'll say, okay, here's version 1 of the song. Here's version 2. Who preferred version 1? Who preferred version 2? And then I'll ask people for their comments about what the differences they hear. And people say, oh, it had more bass. It had more richness. It sounded more open. It had more three-dimensionality. And all I changed was tweaking the level up by a dB on one version.
Nice.
So it's a real thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So then Alan jumped in with a comment and said, what monitors are you using, Ian, since you're talking about hearing 50 cycles? So we didn't get a chance to hear what you're listening to on your end to make all these decisions.
So here, this is my little room at home where I do things like this. I've got they're ancient, a pair of Bowers and Wilkin. They're actually hi-fi speakers. They're the same. They're the same make. They're a different model than the ones I used to have at the studio I originally worked, where they were nearly as big as I was, but they were still hi-fi speakers. I mean, anybody who can afford to spend that much on hi-fi speakers, I'm super jealous of. But yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me is that monitoring has changed so much since then. When I first started mastering in the early 90s, the difference between a pair of mastering monitors and a pair of mixing monitors or any kind of other monitors was huge. And since then, I would say general speaker technology has improved to the point where now you've got brands like Dynaudio and Focal, I mean, so many of the mainstream studio monitors have improved to the point where I think it's much more feasible to monitor on them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is one of the interesting things about mastering, because, a real mastering studio will have speakers that could be hundreds of thousands of pounds and stretch from floor to the ceiling. I'm not saying that's not a good thing to have, but it's not necessarily a requirement. The gear that we use, it's like plugins, is that plugin that I was using there any the worse because it costs $300 instead of the $100,000 that it used to cost when it was a piece of hardware on a mainframe? And the answer is no, because it's the same processing.
Yeah.
The Vice EQ and de-esser and multiband that used to be in all the top mastering studios is also now available as in plugin form. Excuse me. So this stuff has to be good enough. It doesn't have to necessarily be super expensive. But the thing is, monitoring, that'd be a whole other webcast. Because there's room, there's acoustic treatment. You can see I've got some panels at the back.
Did you mention subwoofer in there?
I didn't mention subwoofer. I don't have a subwoofer because this is quite a small room.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway.
Lots of people do use subwoofers, but you have to be very careful when you set them up because you can introduce as many problems as you solve potentially. That's
I think that's a great takeaway. And what about the size of your speakers? What are the cone sizes?
I don't know. In here, they're not very big. They're maybe 6-8 inch woofers, I think.
Right. I think that's a good takeaway for us, is to just know that with a pair of, high quality hi-fi speakers with 6 to 8 inch woofers and no sub, you can still make decisions about low end like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm super lucky because I've got my back catalogue there that I mastered on some of the best gear in the world. So when I'm setting up a new room or a new system or tweaking something, I just put stuff that I used to work on in the past on, and I know how it sounds. That's a huge advantage for me. if you guys want to do something similar, then I'd encourage you to find reference material. So it's stuff that sounds amazing to you wherever you listen, and use that and kind of think, does it sound right to me in here? Does it sound weird? And, kind of go through that process of figuring all this stuff out. Anybody who's interested in this is the kind of thing we get into in much more detail on the Home Mastering Masterclass course, which I will be running again probably towards the end of June.
Yes. So I wanted to say that too. It's just like the level of stuff you were showing us today was awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much. But sometimes for people, it might seem a little bit fast moving and deep, and just know, Rockstars, that the Home Mastering Masterclass will take you into that stuff and give you the time to absorb each aspect of it and practice, master yourself in your studio, really understand these comparisons and really understand how to work with all this stuff. Do you have time for a couple more questions? I think we might have a couple in the chat.
Yeah, we can do a couple more. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this one, whoops, I just lost it.
I saw one from Alan saying, can I share basic guidance about setting up multiband compression components? The answer is yes. So my starting point is I have a low band with a crossover at 160 hertz and I have a high band with a crossover at 3.5 kilohertz. They're quite gentle crossovers. I encourage you to find one that has phase linear crossovers to avoid any possible cancellation in the crossover regions. And I usually start with a 2-to-1 ratio. And I tend to use longer attack and release times. So like long in comparison to what most people use in mixing. So maybe 100 milliseconds as a starting point. And obviously it depends on the music. But the idea behind that is that the limiter is going to deal with the transients, with the spiky stuff. So I don't need the compressor to deal with any of that. So I can let the compressor work slower and control the body of the sound, the tone of the instruments and the voice and the bass guitar, and then the limiter can deal with all the super fast stuff like the the drum transients and all the rest of it. If you hear a limiter biting into a vocal or a bass sound, in my opinion, you're not using it right.
Right.
And it's not going to sound good. One thing there is a soft clipper element that I like in the TC Electronic as well, that I was using a little bit of that on. So I was doing a little bit of peak limiting, a little bit of soft clipping, just to keep some snap in the transients. You add a little bit of distortion when you do that, but it kind of worked, especially in comparison to your original master and the sound you were going for.
On that topic, maybe we can stick a link in or something, or you can just let them know. But Rockstars, Ian has already done some great videos on his channel where he demonstrates the difference between limiting and clipping. And I can't remember if it was soft and hard, but it was like a few different limiting options. And to me, that was super educational. And that's also relevant to this question that we got from AI Accident. I'm not sure, see if you understand this. So he said, Ian, what's your idea around a pre-master mix with individual tracks and or bus, hard clipping of transients like average 4 to 5 dB without? I'm not sure if I understand the question, to be honest.
He said hard clip.
Yeah, go ahead.
I assume that's a he, but if not, then I apologize. They said that's hard clipping. I don't use hard clipping. So the one in the TC is soft clipping. So it's much more kind of analog, sort of the kind of thing you might get in a tube, or if you push a tape hard, whatever. Hard digital clipping, to me, I mean, people do use it. People like the sound, and it depends what you're clipping and how hard you're clipping it. But I would be cautious, because hard digital clipping is basically pure digital distortion. Everybody's always talking about there's this whole kind of fetish about analog gear and wanting the analog sound.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a red herring. You can get great sound in digital or in analog. But one thing I know for a fact is that analog gear doesn't clip like hard digital clipping. So if you like that kind of analog feel, then hard digital clipping is not the way to go. But a little bit of soft clipping can be just the thing sometimes. I see a question from Stephen.
Yep.
He says, do I have this right? The streaming services will reduce the volume of your music but not increase it. Kind of. It's a little bit more complicated than that, Stephen. Some of them increase it, some of them decrease it. Excuse me. The loudest penalty site will show you whether they are going to increase it or decrease it or not. If you get a plus value, it means they're increasing it. But YouTube and Tidal definitely don't ever increase gain. And that's one of the reasons kind of, I always talk about how the fact that YouTube is always normalized, you will still sometimes get big level jumps there because people have uploaded it super quiet and it hasn't been turned up. Spotify and iTunes do turn up quieter songs if you're listening in track mode or in shuffle or in a playlist, but not if you're listening to an album. Because in an album, we don't want all the songs to be the same loudness. We don't want quiet songs on an album turned up because that's not musically correct. So Spotify and iTunes and Tidal all keep those differences. Tidal keeps them all the time, which I think is really smart. But Spotify and iTunes will turn things up, but they won't turn it up to cause clipping. So just to give you a specific example, if you've got something that's measuring -16 but peaking up at 0, that's not going to get turned up on Spotify, because if they did, it would clip.
Yeah. Just I'm familiar with AI Accident, and I'm pretty sure, if I recall, he's doing a lot of electronic music. So the clipping question might be in that kind of context of aggressive electronic stuff. And if I also recall, correct me if I'm wrong, but AI, didn't you post a picture of like these crazy floor to ceiling hi-fi monitors in your living room? Let me know if that's right. Should we take one more question, Ian? We're right at an hour and a half, so that's probably pretty good for this.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Here's one from Jackshot Records saying that he loves the visualization of the dynameter. And question for you, Ian, are the parameters of the colors customizable or static? And if they're static, what are the boundary values for the color changes? So pretty deep question there.
They are not customizable. We talked about making it customizable, and I think at one point maybe it was, but it started to get super confusing. And honestly, all my plugins have a little bit of an agenda, which is none of them so far changed the sound at all, but my goal is that they would all make the sound better. And since, in my opinion, when you push past that difference of 8 dB between the peak and the loudness level of the music, it's basically downhill all the way from there on. That's what made me make the choices. And actually, if I'm completely transparent about it, what I did is I would take my own masters, run them through Dynameter, and then tweak the settings till my masters look pretty. Because I want what I work on to look good. Just to give you some numbers, so 8 dB is where you hit the red. From memory, 6 dB is brown, and then 4 dB I think is grey. So that's when. So if you mastered a song where the loudness got up to -4 LUFS, which is insanely loud in any genre, in my opinion, that's when you would hit the grey. At -6, it would hit brown. At -8, it hits red. Then orange, I think it's in steps of 2 pretty much. So I think orange is -10, yellow is -12, blue is -14, and I think maybe then, or maybe it's green before it's blue. But yeah, I forget the exact numbers there, but that gives you an idea. I mean, you don't have to follow them, right? I mean, providing you don't, like, I've had people say to me, "Oh, your Dynameter is fantastic. I found that when I make everything brown, it's just right." Which, not what I intended, but that's absolutely fine. If that helps them get the results they're looking for, then that's good for me. I mean, I wanted there to be a little bit of judgment in there, but not so much to make anybody feel bad.
That's awesome. And Brian jumped in saying he loves that brown is the super compressed. And then last comment, Ashwin jumped in, I think, clarifying what AI was talking about, which is that this idea that clipping, could be a useful tool within the buses and stems of a mix before you get to the master, as a way to manage individual elements in a mix. And to me, that just the answer to that is that's a creative decision. Sure, if you like the sound of your drums clipped, then make them clipped, on the way to the master. So, hey, we've been going for a long time. I think we should probably wrap up. But Ian, it's been awesome to hang with you, dude. And thank you so much for both mastering my song. Rockstars, please remember, hit that link right there in the on the video, lidshaw.com/spring, and that'll take you right to the Spotify track. Give it a listen, go see what you think, and just hit the play button a bunch, because we need more plays and it really helps. So thank you. And Ian, thank you for joining us today and doing this. Really, really fun. I learned a ton already. Rockstars, again, encourage you, go follow Ian, subscribe to his channel as well, and follow the Mastering Show podcast. Go follow Production Advice and Mastering Media is your website for professionally mastering. And then the Home Mastering Masterclass, that is the ultimate tool for you there if you want to really, really dive in deep. I also have a mastering thing, but it's a simple version of doing the process. And if you really want to learn how to do this stuff right, turn to Ian, because he's the master at this. No pun intended. But Ian, thank you so much, man. Do you have any closing comments for the rock stars or anything we forgot to mention?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I hope you found it useful and interesting. Yeah, we're up to episode 84 of the podcast now. So if you're interested in this stuff, there's a ton of information over there. And yeah, productionadvice.co.uk is the website. Just search for me on Facebook. Well, some of you are watching this on Facebook, or Twitter, wherever. I'm always happy to connect with new people. And the masterclass is homemastering.com. If you head over there now, it's currently closed, but you can drop your email in and you'll get notified when it starts up again. So awesome. Yeah, it'd be great to talk to you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
All right, man. And I just remembered too, one of your recent episodes on the podcast was interviewing somebody about mastering 4 clubs. So rock stars, if you're interested in that whole kind of electronic sound, they focus on that in depth.
Yeah, a super interesting interview with Luca Pretalese, who has mastered stuff for Diplo and Tiesto and a bunch of other people. And he talks specifically about clipping, incidentally, in there. But he is talking, it's not hard clipping, not hard digital clipping.
Nice.
There are different flavors. And if you wanted to see that video that Lidge mentioned, I'm pretty sure if you go to productionadvice.co.uk and just type clipping into the search box, it should pop straight up.
Yeah, awesome. And just closing reminder, rock stars, hit that link, go listen to my song on Spotify, see how it all turned out as a final master, and let us know what you think. And thanks so much for watching. You can come back to this video and drop in a comment after you listen to it too, and just comment on how it sounded. Thanks for all the nice words. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks all.